All right. So, I have mentioned before about the issue of trans athletes, that it should be up to the governing body of whatever sport we're talking about as opposed to politicians. Well, now we have an article about that. Not exactly a good one, but let's just get into it. The National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, also known as the NAIA, announced a policy Monday that all but bans transgender athletes from competing in women's sports at its 241 mostly small colleges across the country. Okay, one nitpick. Are we banning all trans athletes or trans women? Either whoever wrote this article doesn't know trans men exist, or the NAIA doesn't know that trans men exist. Not sure. The NAIA Council of Presidents approved the policy in a 20-0 vote at its annual convention in Kansas City, Missouri. The NAIA, which oversees some 83,000 athletes competing in more than 25 sports, is believed to be the first college sports organization to take such a step. Okay, so is it complete ban or almost a complete ban? What's happening here? According to the Transgender Participation Policy, which goes into effect in August, all athletes may participate in NAIA-sponsored male sports, but only athletes whose biological sex assigned at birth is female and have not begun hormone therapy will be allowed to participate in women's sports. Okay, so that's obviously getting rid of trans men, because you have to be born female but can't have begun hormone therapy, which, alright, so trans men are perfectly fine as long as they've not undergone hormone therapy. I'm confused. So, women can compete in women's sports. Females can compete in women's sports as long as they haven't transitioned to become men. What trans man wants to compete in women's sports? Either I'm totally misunderstanding that sentence, or the NAIA doesn't understand what a trans woman is. So I'm very, very confused. But regardless, not only can women who have not gone through male puberty, not only do you have to have not gone on hormones, but you can't have gone through, even if haven't gone through male puberty. I'm very, very confused about this, because this sounds like it's because you're terrified of trans men. Which, on the one hand, I'm happy that someone acknowledged that trans men exist, but what does that have to do with women's sports? I think somebody's confused, or I'm completely confused. Someone's confused. A student who has begun hormone therapy may participate in activities such as workouts, practices, and team activities, but not in intercollegiate competition. So, what would be the point of joining an intercollegiate team? Oh yeah, I'm just, going through the paces, making me feel like I exist, but then I'm just going to twiddle my thumbs during game time. I'm sorry, what? Who the hell wants to do that? I mean, granted, there are some people who are perfectly fine being, as a basketball term, bench warmers, but I would think most people who want to be part of a team want to have a chance to play. And this is telling them you can do everything but. How fair is that? This is This might actually be worse than separate but equal. Yeah, definitely worse. NAIA programs in competitive cheer and competitive dance are open to all students. The NAIA policy notes every other sport, including some combination of strength, speed, and stamina, providing competitive advantages for male student athletes. Okay. So obviously they're talking about male puberty. Trans women who've gone through male puberty. But that's not what the previous sentence said. That's not what the previous paragraph. Up until now, it's been confusing about hormone therapy. And now they're talking about puberty, which isn't hormone therapy. It's just hormones. So I don't know if this writer is confused or if the NAIA is confused as to what the hell they're talking about, because I sure as hell am confused. NAIA President and CEO Jim Carr said in an interview with the Associated Press he understands the policy will generate controversy. Well, yeah, you don't even know what you're talking about. But that it was deemed best for member schools for competitive reasons. We know that there are a lot of opinions and a lot of people have a very emotional reaction to this, and we want to be respectful of all that, Carr said. But we feel like our primary responsibility is fairness and competition, so we are following that path. And we've tried as best as we could to allow for some participation by all. Really? Participation by all? You're basically telling people that, yeah, you can join a team, but you will never, ever, ever see competition. So, what's the point of joining a team if you can't compete? And then there's the part about, oh, you can join, but you can't be on hormones. You have to be born female, but you can't have taken hormone therapy. So, that to me is a problem with trans men. So which has nothing to do with trans women, because obviously if you're born a woman, if you're going to be transitioning, you're going to be transitioning into a man. And if you're on hormones, that is. So you wouldn't even dream of competing in women's sports. So, again, they seem to be covering their bases in a way to show that they have absolutely no idea what the hell they're talking about. I mean, do you know what a trans woman is? Do you know what a trans man is? Have you heard of a trans man? All right. The NAIA's 2023-2024 policy did not bar transgender and non-binary athletes from competing in the division of their choice in the regular season. In the postseason, and with some exceptions for those who have had hormone therapy, athletes had to compete in the division of their birth sex. Okay, so now I understand that part. That you have to compete in your birth sex category, but they don't want to have a repeat of what happened to that high school boy who was on hormones, was living life like a man, and had to compete against girls. And what do you know? He cleaned the floor with them because, of course, he's stronger. He's on hormones. So, yeah. Basically, you're saying, trans people can compete. They just aren't allowed to exist as trans people. So they have to decide between their mental health and competing in sports. I'm sorry, how is this fair to them? This might be, in your view, fair to cis people, but how is it fair to trans people exactly? Especially trans people who haven't gone through puberty yet. So if they're on puberty blockers, what's the problem? I mean, it's not like, yes, they are technically on hormone therapy, probably because they want transition, but how does this give them any advantage? It doesn't, because they haven't gone through the puberty yet. I don't think they know what they're talking about. I really don't think they know what they're talking about. They might have some nominal idea, but there is no number of transgender athletes at the high school and college levels. No number. Though it is believed to be small. Well, yeah, the number of trans people in general is small. The topic has become a hot button issue among conservative groups and others who believe transgender athletes should not be allowed to compete on girls' and women's sports teams. And oddly enough, it's usually the people who, up until this point, never gave a shit about women's sports. They probably never cared about people who were on puberty blockers up until they heard that trans people might be taking them, because this isn't about fairness. This isn't about anything other than hating trans people. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't a conversation to be had. I'm just claiming that most of the people who started this and who continue this are bad faith actors. All right. Shivali Patel, senior counsel at the National Women's Law Center, said her organization was outraged by the NAIA policy. This is unacceptable and blatant discrimination that only harms trans, non-binary, and intersex individuals, but limits the potential of all athletes, Patel said in a statement. It's important to recognize that these discriminatory policies don't enhance fairness and competition. Instead, they send a message of exclusion and reinforce dangerous stereotypes that harm all women. Last month, more than a dozen current and former college athletes filed a federal lawsuit against the NCAA, accusing the sport's governing body for more than 50,000 athletes of violating their rights by allowing transgender women to compete in women's sports. Fun fact, Dawn Staley, who is currently the head coach of the South Carolina women's basketball team, who just won the NCAA tournament with a perfect season, isn't one of them. Hours after the NAIA announcement, the NCAA released a statement. College sports are the premier stage for women's sports in America, and the NCAA will continue to promote Title IX, make unprecedented investments in women's sports, and ensure fair competition for all student athletes in all NCAA championships. At least 24 states have laws barring transgender women and girls from competing in certain women's or girls' sports competitions. The Biden administration originally planned to release a new federal Title IX rule. The law forbids discrimination based on sex in education, addressing both campus sexual assault and transgender athletics. Earlier this year, the department decided to split them into separate rules, and the athletics rule now remains in limbo. It's similar to the NIL stuff with all these different state laws, said Casey Havacost, a former Division I athlete who is now a higher education attorney at Bricker Graydon. The NCAA kind of does something, but nothing really happens, and they look to the federal government. And the federal government is slow to put something in place, and then we're left with all these different state laws. Havacost expects lawsuits will follow and challenge the NAIA policy on the basis of Title IX laws. For those who are unaware, Title IX was the groundbreaking law that allowed for women in sports to not be discriminated against. Unfortunately, that kind of did away with a lot of men's sports because in the equation they put football. which for a lot of colleges is huge. So that took away a lot of men's sports because they wanted to make the number of women's and men's sports even. Which on paper sounds good, but if you're taking the number of athletes, and a football team is a lot of athletes, there are a lot of athletes on a football team, then you're basically handicapping other men's sports because then they have more athletes than women do. Because women do not have the equivalent of football. So yeah, that could also use some tweaking in that on that front. All right. I feel like at some point it will have to be addressed, she said, but it's a really complex issue. It might take a Supreme Court ruling. And considering the makeup of the Supreme Court, not sure I trust what it would say. About 190 of the 241 NAIA schools are private, and about 124 of those have religious affiliations of varying degrees, Carr said. Of the 20 presidents who voted, 17 are from schools affiliated with Christian denominations. Yeah, somehow not surprising at all. People have certain views of the world, and even though I believe all our Council of Presidents members are trying to think of what's best for the NAIA, they certainly come to these kinds of issues with their own beliefs and the missions of their institutions in mind, Carr said. I would think that had some impact. And that's probably true. But, just like any other, first off, there aren't that many trans athletes in college sports. I mean, there's barely that many in high school. So it's not like, these schools have to decide, are we going to keep this sport or are we going to let this trans person in? That's probably not happening. So, yeah. Patel said the NAIA ban, along with the state laws, emphasizes the urgency in having clear Title IX rules that expressly prohibit this kind of sex-based discrimination and ensure the rights of all students, including transgender, non-binary, and intersex athletes, are safeguarded. Trans athletes deserve a chance to play. I don't like that they call it sex-based discrimination because it's not. If this was sex-based discrimination, then that would imply that trans women are female, biologically female, which they are not, or that trans men are biologically male, which they are not. So yeah, it would be a lot easier and a lot less muddy if you use the correct terminology. The NCAA has had a policy for transgender athletes' participation in place since 2010, which called for 1 year of testosterone suppression treatment and documented testosterone levels submitted before championship competitions. Which makes sense because, like I've mentioned before, testosterone doping is a thing. So, yeah, testing people to make sure that they don't have high levels of testosterone is something that's in place regardless. And that doesn't affect trans athletes because as long as they have the correct amount of hormone, what's the problem? In 2022, the NCAA revised its policies on transgender athlete participation in an attempt to align with national sports governing bodies following the lead of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. The three-phase implementation of the policy includes a continuation of the 2010 policy requiring transgender women to be on hormone replacement therapy for at least 1 year, plus the submission of a hormone level test before the start of both the regular season and championship events, which to me sounds reasonable. You want to make sure that the testosterone levels are at the correct level. So that makes perfect sense. Again, this is something that cis people have to deal with as well. Make sure that they don't have too much testosterone, whether it's men's competition or women's competition. So, in that regard, you're treating trans people the same way you treat anybody else. So, I'm okay with that. The third phase adds national and international sports governing body standards to the NCAA's policy, and after a delay is scheduled to be implemented for the 2024-25 school year on August 1st. There are some 15.3 million public high school students in the United States, and a 2019 study by the CDC estimated 1.8% of them, about 275,000, are transgender. The number of athletes within that group is much smaller. A 2017 survey by Human Rights Campaign suggests fewer than 15% of all transgender boys and transgender girls play sports. The number of NAIA transgender athletes would be far smaller. Again, people are freaking out over something that isn't an issue. Now, I get it that you want to have a policy in place in case it does become an issue. I get that. But let's be reasonable here. If you want to say that people who've gone through male puberty don't get to compete in women's sports, that's a conversation to be had, because there are mixed studies as to whether it benefits the athlete to go through male puberty. But to just blanket say, oh yeah, you can't compete, I'm sorry, that's just not helpful. So I like the way the NCAA does it. Not thrilled with the NAIA, especially since the way it's phrased is very confusing as to whether they even understand what's going on. But with that, that is the end of the article, and I will see you guys in the next video.